My entire family, all 28 of them, flew across the country to watch my sister drop confetti in the desert, matching peach sundresses, a 7-tier cake, and a $50,000 party at the Four Seasons in Sedona, Arizona. 5 weeks later, not a single one of them drove 3 hours to watch me get married. Not a real event, my mother said. You know how things are, my father texted. I can't be bouncing around, my pregnant sister complained. 41 days after that, my phone lit up with 239 missed calls, texts, and voicemails from every last one of them. They had just found out who my day trader husband really was. And suddenly, 3 hours didn't seem so far. But here's what none of them knew. And what I'm about to tell you. The distance was never the problem. They were. Before I go on, if this story hits close to home, take a moment to like and subscribe, only if you genuinely connect with it. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. My name is Serena. I'm 32 and this is how I lost my family and found out I never really had one. Let me pull you back to a crisp Saturday in April. That was the exact day the glass shattered. The day I finally understood I had spent my entire life auditioning for a role I was never ever going to get. The Thompson family lived in Scarsdale, New York, inside a massive 6-bedroom colonial. It had a gorgeous wraparound porch that my mother demanded be repainted every single spring. She insisted on premium Benjamin Moore colors, because Penelope Thompson simply did not do Home Depot. To her, appearances weren't just everything, they were the only thing. Our dining room table easily seated 10 people. The crisp linen tablecloth always came from Pottery Barn. But the most important part of Sunday dinner was the seating arrangement. Nobody ever spoke about it out loud, but everybody understood the absolute law of it. My mother sat at the head, ruling her kingdom. My father, Robert, sat quietly to her right, close enough to nod obediently at her every word, but far enough away to stay out of the crossfire. My younger sister, Megan, and her husband, Brian, sat directly across from each other, glowing like royalty holding court. And then there was me. I sat at the very far end, practically shoved into the kitchen. My spot was right next to the heavy swinging door. Every single time someone got up to fetch more wine, that wooden door would smack hard against the back of my chair. I am the boundary line, I used to think, gripping my fork tightly. The physical barrier between the perfect family and the help. My mother ran a highly successful chain of 4 boutiques across Westchester County called Maison Penelope. She proudly referred to it as her empire. My father ran a small management consulting firm. It was steady and respectable. The money was fine, but the image was flawless. Megan was 5 years younger than me. She was a former junior Miss New York who morphed seamlessly into a lifestyle influencer with 55,000 fiercely loyal followers. She married Brian Kessler, a slick real estate developer who drove a loud Porsche Macan and dropped financial buzzwords like cap rates, the way normal people talked about the weather. They lived in a pristine $1.5 million townhouse in Bronxville. Every single detail of their existence looked fiercely expensive, because it was engineered to be. Then there was me, a freelance graphic designer crammed into a tiny 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, driving a tired 2017 Toyota Corolla with a dented rear bumper I couldn't afford to fix. My mother always dismissed my career to her friends as Serena's little art thing. Back in Scarsdale, there is a large family portrait resting on the mantel. It was taken 4 Christmases ago. If you look closely at the heavy silver frame, you will notice my face is actually cut right in half by the edge of the glass. Nobody ever bothered to reframe it. I didn't know it sitting there that April, but in exactly 5 months, every single person at that Sunday table would be crying, begging me to save them, and I would look them in the eye and say no. This toxic pattern didn't start with my wedding, though. It started with a painting. I was 15 years old. The New York statewide Young Artist competition had over 250 entries that year. I spent 5 grueling months creating an oil landscape of the Hudson Valley. It won first place. When they called my name, my sweet art teacher, Mrs. Carmichael, burst into happy tears. My mother had sworn she would be sitting right there in the 3rd row. As I walked up the stage steps, clutching the heavy brass plaque, I eagerly scanned the audience. Please be there. Please, just look at me. She wasn't. The 3rd row was completely empty. My stomach dropped straight through the floorboards. While I stood trembling under those hot stage lights in Albany, my mother was 50 miles away. She was at a bridal shop, casually watching Megan get fitted for a sparkly Junior Miss New York pageant dress. Carmichael had to drive me home in the dark. I quietly pushed open my front door, holding my heavy plaque against my chest like a shield. My mother barely glanced up from the living room couch, her mouth full of sewing pins as she adjusted Megan's satin sash. "Oh, sweetie, I'm so incredibly sorry," she sighed, waving a dismissive hand. "But Megan's pageant is only 3 weeks away. You understand, right? Your little painting will still be there tomorrow." But it wasn't there tomorrow. It was never hung on any wall. I simply couldn't bear to look at the canvas without seeing that glaringly empty third row. Megan's gaudy Junior Miss New York crown, however, sat proudly on the central living room shelf for the next decade. Years later, at 25, I was cleaning out our dusty garage to help my dad. I found my award-winning painting. It was shoved under a damp cardboard box of Megan's old pageant sashes, dumped face down, and carelessly wrapped in a black plastic trash bag. I completely stopped painting after that afternoon. It wasn't because my talent dried up, it was because I realized the audience I desperately wanted to impress didn't even care I was on the stage. It would take me 8 more painful years to figure out I had been performing for the completely wrong crowd. Then I met Daniel. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon in November at a cozy Greenwich Village coffee shop. He was sitting alone, deeply absorbed in a dog-eared copy of Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. I was furiously sketching a digital logo concept on my iPad. He looked up, catching my eye. "Are you an artist?" he asked softly. "Freelance designer," I corrected, offering a tired smile. "Same thing," he chuckled, his eyes crinkling warmly. "Just with invoices." I actually laughed out loud. He bought me a second coffee. He was wearing a faded plaid flannel shirt and worn-in jeans. Out the window I saw him unlock a beaten-up Ford F-150 truck with dried mud caked thick on the wheel wells. When he casually mentioned he worked in investments, my brain instantly pictured a regular guy with a basic Fidelity account and a boring spreadsheet hobby. We dated blissfully for 9 incredible months before the illusion shattered. The truth didn't even come from Daniel, it came from Nina. Nina had been my fiercely protective best friend since our freshman orientation at NYU. She was now a sharp corporate attorney in Manhattan. We were sitting on her apartment floor, splitting a cheap bottle of Merlot, when she suddenly gasped, aggressively tapping her phone screen. She shoved the bright device directly into my face. "Seer," she whispered, her voice shaking, "your rugged truck-driving boyfriend is currently sitting on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list." I blinked hard, trying to focus. Daniel Ashton, founder and CEO of Ashton Capital Partners, a private equity fund managing $3.1 billion in global assets. I stared blankly at the glossy digital portrait. Same faded flannel shirt. Same easy, crooked grin. The hardwood floor beneath me felt like it was violently tilting sideways. When I finally confronted him later that night, my heart pounding in my throat, he didn't stumble or apologize. He just calmly explained, "My dad's trusted business partner robbed our family blind when I was 13, Daniel said quietly, taking my trembling hands across our usual diner booth. I watched cold, hard money turn decent people into absolute monsters. I swore on my life I would never let that happen to me. I needed to know, if I finally met someone special, would they stay if they genuinely believed I had absolutely nothing to offer them? You might wonder how a literal billionaire keeps his identity hidden for almost a year in the modern digital age, especially with my influencer sister practically living inside her smartphone. The answer is tragically simple. Pure, unfiltered arrogance. The very first time Daniel politely introduced himself to my family, mentioning investments before climbing into his muddy Ford truck, Penelope and Brian instantly categorized him as worthless lower class. To them, he simply wasn't important enough to warrant a 5-second Google search. In their shallow world, if you didn't flash a heavy gold Rolex or loudly drop obnoxious industry buzzwords, you essentially did not exist. I chose to stay with Daniel, and I chose to keep his massive secret locked tight. But I didn't do it for his protection. I did it for my own desperately bruised heart. I need to know they can love just Serena. Not Serena the billionaire's wife. Just me. Nina aggressively warned me against it. "Sarah, listen to me," she snapped. "If your greedy family ever finds out what that man is actually worth, they are going to suddenly become very, very interested in your life." I defensively told her she was just being cynical. She looked at me with sad, knowing eyes and told me she was simply being accurate. But neither of us realized that by keeping his secret, I was unknowingly setting a massive silent trap. A trap my family was about to sprint blindly into, destroying their flawless empire in the process. I held on to his massive secret. I didn't guard it for his sake, though. I guarded it for mine. I desperately needed my family to love me simply for breathing, not for the heavy dollar signs attached to my future husband's surname. Nina aggressively warned me against it. If they ever find out what he's worth, she said, her voice dripping with hard truth, they'll suddenly become very, very interested in your life. I defensively told her she was just being cynical. She looked right through me and said she was being accurate. Daniel proposed on a breezy Saturday morning. There was no crowded restaurant, no ridiculous skywriting, and no choreographed flash mob. It was just the two of us sitting quietly on a weathered bench in Central Park, watching the choppy gray waters of the Hudson River crash against the cold banks. The ring he slipped onto my finger was a breathtaking 4-carat Colombian emerald, flawlessly set in pure platinum. To a trained jeweler who actually knew precious stones, it was a masterpiece. To my shallow family, it just looked nice. It doesn't matter what they think, I told myself, tracing the cool metal. He chose me. That is enough. That evening, my heart hammering against my ribs, I posted a glowing photo to our family group chat, the gorgeous ring on my finger, Daniel's strong arm wrapped securely around my shoulders, the sparkling water behind us. I typed 3 simple words. He asked. I said yes. I stared at the screen. I waited. My mother's response finally chimed in exactly 18 agonizing minutes later. That's nice, sweetie. And then, in the very next breath, a second text popped up. Girls, has anyone finalized the color palette for Megan's baby reveal? I'm thinking peach and silver. Thoughts. That was it. That was my grand engagement announcement in the Thompson family. It was completely bulldozed by balloon colors. When Megan got engaged 3 years earlier, my mother hired a professional photographer to secretly capture Brian dropping to one knee at the Lincoln Memorial. She threw a lavish engagement party for 90 wealthy guests at their exclusive country club. She proudly posted 16 times on Instagram in a single weekend. I know the exact number because I dutifully liked every single one. For me, I got a generic heart emoji and an instant subject change. I sent out my elegant wedding invitations 4 months before the big date. I booked Silver Oak Vineyard in New York, a stunningly beautiful property nestled in the Catskill foothills. It was exactly a 2-hour and 40-minute drive from Scarsdale. I carefully chose it because the delicate dogwood trees bloomed beautifully in April, and the wooden ceremony arbor overlooked the rolling mountains. More importantly, it was close to home, easy to get to, no expensive plane tickets required. 7 long weeks passed. Not a single RSVP card came back in the mail. My mailbox echoed with emptiness. I started making phone calls, a knot of pure dread twisting in my stomach. My father picked up on the 3rd ring. He cleared his throat and hemmed awkwardly for 40 painful seconds before he finally muttered, Your mother thinks, well, it might conflict with Megan's schedule. Megan's baby isn't due for 5 months, Dad, I whispered. Silence, a long, heavy, suffocatingly familiar silence. I should have seen the ugly truth right then. But hope is a dangerous drug. It makes you keep your eyes half shut when they should be ripped wide open. Instead of facing it, I packed a bag and flew down to Arizona for Megan's extravagant gender reveal. It was held at the breathtaking Four Seasons in Sedona. My mother had hired a high-end event planner. There was a massive balloon arch that cost more than my monthly rent, a live jazz band playing smoothly in the desert heat, and buzzing drone footage to capture the epic confetti drop. She catered the whole thing with a fresh raw bar and a ridiculous 7-tier cake shaped like a baby carriage. 28 family members flew in for it. Aunt Laura traveled from Massachusetts. Aunt Rebecca flew from Colorado. Uncle John came from Nevada. Even distant cousins I hadn't seen since my grandmother's funeral showed up, all wearing matching peach sundresses because Penelope Thompson had fired off a strict group email with a mandatory mood board. I paid for my own economy ticket and my own basic hotel room. At the party, I was seated at a cramped table right near the bustling kitchen, my exact same position at every family function, just with better lighting. Daniel came with me, looking handsome and relaxed in a simple navy polo and khakis. Nobody bothered to ask him a single question all night, except for Brian. During dessert, Brian leaned arrogantly across the table and smirked. So, what do you actually do? Investments, Daniel replied smoothly. Brian snorted, a condescending sound. Like, a day trader thing? Daniel calmly sipped his red wine. Something like that. Dismissing him instantly, Brian turned to his buddy Gary and aggressively started in on his absolute favorite topic, himself. I'm pushing hard to get a meeting with Ashton Capital, Brian bragged loudly, loosening his expensive silk tie. They're the biggest private equity fund doing coastal development on the East Coast. If I land them, man, we're talking generational wealth. He slapped the table hard, making the silverware rattle. Whoever runs that massive fund, I'd practically kill to get 15 minutes in a room with him. Daniel was sitting exactly 3 feet away. Underneath the heavy tablecloth, I squeezed his hand so hard my knuckles turned white. He didn't even flinch. His face remained a mask of polite indifference. Later, near the towering cake, I overheard my mother loudly bragging to Aunt Laura about the party's total cost, $50,000. She proudly declared she had personally contributed $18,000 of it. Nothing but the absolute best for my Meggie, she cooed, dabbing her dry eyes with a monogrammed cocktail napkin. Standing in the shadows, I thought about my beautifully printed wedding invitations sitting completely unanswered in 28 different mailboxes. When the pink confetti finally exploded into the desert sky, I clapped until my hands stung. Smile, Serena. Don't let them see you break. Exactly 5 weeks before my wedding day, the RSVPs finally started trickling back. Every single one delivered the exact same gut punch. Decline. Aunt Laura wrote, "We just flew out to Arizona last month, sweetie. We're completely travel exhausted. Massachusetts to New York was a 6-hour drive. Massachusetts to Sedona was a 5-hour flight. But apparently, exhaustion only worked in one direction." Aunt Rebecca scribbled, "It's just so far for a quick weekend, Sear." She had happily flown 4 hours from Denver to watch balloons pop. A simple 3-hour scenic drive to New York was suddenly an impossible trek. Megan texted, "I'm pregnant, Sear. I really can't be bouncing around. Send pics, though." She was exactly 6 months along. The identical 6 months along she had been when she flew to the hot desert and danced until midnight in designer heels. My father sent a cowardly single-line text, "I'll try to make it, Serena. You know how things are." He didn't try. He didn't come. Then, just 12 days before the wedding, my mother called. I pressed record. New York is a one-party consent state, and Nina had strictly told me months ago to start documenting our interactions. I didn't fully understand why at the time. I just trusted my best friend. "Honey," my mother sighed, her voice dripping in that sickeningly sweet tone she always used right before saying something incredibly cruel. "It's really just a small, simple ceremony anyway, right? It's not like Megan's reveal. Now that was a real event. Please don't take it personally." I held the phone away from my face. My eyes locked onto the sample invitation resting on my desk. Heavy cream cardstock. Elegant gold lettering. April 18th. The magical date my entire life was supposed to finally change. 28 invitations sent, 28 declines received, and my own mother had the breathtaking nerve to call my wedding not a real event. I didn't cry that night. The tears were completely burned out. Instead, I coldly opened my laptop. I screenshotted every single dismissive text, scanned every insulting RSVP card, and saved every pathetic excuse. I dumped them all into a secure folder on Google Drive. Nina had told me, document everything. Not for revenge, Serena, for absolute clarity. I didn't know yet exactly how crystal clear things were about to get, because 2 days before my wedding, my phone buzzed violently. It was my younger cousin Maya. She was crying so hysterically she could barely draw a breath. Maya was a struggling college sophomore, her expensive tuition entirely paid for by my mother's suffocating generosity. "Serena, I'm so sorry," she choked out, her voice trembling with raw fear. Aunt Penelope sent a secret mass email. She told the whole family that anyone who dares to attend your wedding will be instantly cut off. No more lavish family vacations, no more tuition help, no more country club access. She made it a vicious test of loyalty. My blood ran ice cold. The phone felt like a brick in my hand. This wasn't just casual apathy. It wasn't just them being busy. It was an active, violently orchestrated boycott. She didn't just forget me. She actively erased me. The quiet night before my wedding, there was no joyous rehearsal dinner. There were no clinking glasses or heartfelt toasts. I sat completely alone in a cheap, dimly lit motel room near the vineyard. I was carefully ironing my white wedding dress so the delicate fabric wouldn't wrinkle. I reached over to pick up my phone to check the time. A notification popped up. Megan's latest Instagram story. I clicked it. The screen illuminated the dark room. My mother had thrown a massive surprise pre-baby VIP spa night at a wildly expensive luxury resort right in the heart of Manhattan. The entire family was there. They were all wearing matching plush white robes, clinking crystal flutes of expensive champagne, and laughing joyously directly into the camera lens. They were fiercely celebrating her on the exact same night they were supposed to be celebrating me. I watched the glowing video 3 times in a row. My hands were shaking so badly that the hissing steam from the hot iron slipped and burned my bare fingers. I didn't even feel the heat. The deafening roar of the betrayal was so much louder than any physical pain. They had drawn their line in the sand, but they had absolutely no idea the storm that was waiting for them on the other side. Silver Oak Vineyard sat peacefully on 45 acres of rolling, vibrant green in the Catskill foothills. The ceremony arbor was draped heavily in fragile dogwood branches, pale pink and crisp white petals cascading downward like something out of a breathtaking landscape I might have painted once, back when I still believed my art mattered. 80 pristine white folding chairs were set up on the manicured grass, 40 on the left side for Daniel's family, 40 on the right side for mine. By 4:15 p.m., Daniel's side was completely full. His mother, Martha, a retired and fiercely intelligent NYU law professor, sat proudly in the very front row, wearing a stunning champagne-colored Valentino sheath dress. His older brother had happily flown all the way from Seattle. His old college roommate, his firm's chief financial officer, and his childhood best friend from a dusty summer camp in Vermont were all there, laughing warmly in the spring breeze. 40 chairs, 40 smiling people. Then, there was my side. I had Nina. I had 4 loyal friends from my NYU dorm days. I had 3 former co-workers from the grueling design firm where I'd spent my first 3 years out of school. 8 people. 32 gaping, empty white chairs. The sweet wedding planner, a woman named Daisy who had been professionally cheerful all morning, suddenly lost her bright smile. She stepped close, gently touching my elbow. Her eyes swam with deeply uncomfortable pity. "Sweetheart, should we quickly rearrange the seating? Maybe move some of the groom's guests over to fill the gaps?" I stood perfectly still, letting the cool wind kiss my cheeks. I stared hard at those 32 abandoned chairs. The golden afternoon sunlight hit the stark white wood, freezing the scene like a tragic, permanent photograph. They couldn't even give me one day, my brain whispered. Just one single day to be the center of the room. "Leave them," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I want to remember exactly what this looks like." Daniel found me tucked away in the bridal suite 15 minutes before the music started. He didn't offer empty platitudes or fake toxic positivity. He simply reached out, enclosing both of my trembling hands inside his warm, solid grip. "Their absence is not your failure, Serena," he said, his dark eyes locking onto mine with fierce certainty. "It is entirely their loss, and I promise you, one day, they will know exactly what they missed." During the short ceremony, Martha stood up to read a poem. It was a beautiful piece about deep roots, winding rivers, and the rare, brave people who actively choose to stay. As her steady voice echoed over the silent vineyard, I finally cried. But the tears sliding down my face didn't come from a place of crushing sadness. They came from a sudden, sharp, breathtaking clarity. I had just spent 32 years of my life desperately begging for scraps of love from people who simply did not have any to give. The begging was finally over. After we exchanged our vows, while our guests happily drank crisp New York Chardonnay under the blooming arbor, Nina urgently pulled me aside. She didn't say a word. She just held up her glowing phone screen. My mother had posted a brand new Instagram story that exact same afternoon. It was a perfectly filtered photo of a lavish brunch. She and Megan were smiling brightly at a trendy cafe in Bronxville. The glossy caption read, "Mother-Daughter Day, so blessed." Same day, same exact afternoon, a breezy 3 hours away. My mother had actively chosen overpriced avocado toast over her eldest daughter's wedding. I stared at the screen, feeling the last remaining invisible string tying me to that family snap in half. I was so glad I left those 32 chairs completely empty. They weren't a desperate guilt trip anymore. They were my permanent receipt. 4 days later, I was back in my Brooklyn apartment. I was technically still in the Thompson family group chat. I hadn't left it yet, partly out of deeply ingrained habit, but mostly because a morbid part of me wanted to see what excuse they would invent. What they actually said was infinitely worse than pure silence. Megan casually sent the first message. "So, how was the little wedding? Did you end up doing that cheap Pinterest thing?" My mother chimed in right behind her. "I'm sure it was lovely, sweetie. Send pictures when you get a chance." There was absolutely no mention of the glaring fact that she hadn't shown up. There was no fake apology, there was no dramatic explanation, just the serene, arrogant assumption that my marriage was a tiny, irrelevant footnote, and their glamorous chapter had already moved on. Brian predictably jumped in next. "Heard you married some investment guy. Good for you. Day trading out of a basement must be exciting." And then Aunt Rebecca proudly posted a glowing selfie from a sparkling resort pool. She was holding a tropical drink in the Bahamas. Her caption, desperately needed this getaway after all that exhausting traveling last month. She had eagerly booked an expensive international vacation exactly 3 days after telling me a simple 3-hour drive to upstate New York was just too far. I sat alone on my couch, reading every single toxic message. I didn't type a single word in response. I just raised my hand and screenshotted each message. Slowly, carefully, methodically, like a quiet detective photographing ugly evidence at a sprawling crime scene. You wrote the ending. I am just keeping the script. That evening, Nina called. Sarah, are you okay? I glanced toward my tiny kitchen. Daniel was standing at the stove, quietly making pasta, deliberately giving me the physical space I needed to process. I'm completely done hoping, I told her, my voice dropping an entire octave. And I'm officially done being quiet about it. That night, my laptop glowing in the dark, I created a brand new empty folder on my Google Drive. I titled it simply, Receipts. I uploaded everything. The scanned RSVP cards, the cruel screenshots from the group chat, the chilling audio recording of my mother's manipulative phone call. I even typed out a neat side-by-side comparison list. Who happily flew to Arizona, who aggressively declined New York, and the exact physical mileage for each trip. Nina had said document everything for clarity. I still didn't know exactly what I was going to do with that heavy digital folder. I just knew that the clarity finally had a physical weight to it, and I was gripping it tightly in both hands. I need to pause right here for a second. If you are watching this, and you have ever been the person whose phone calls always go straight to voicemail, whose massive life milestones get a dismissive "that's nice," while someone else in your family gets a roaring standing ovation, I see you. Hit that like button, not for the silly internet algorithm, but because your painful story matters too. Now what happened next? Let me tell you how the universe balances the scales. Exactly 41 days of total silence passed, and then absolute unfiltered chaos erupted. 3 weeks after I walked down the aisle, the very first massive cracks appeared in Brian Kessler's flashy real estate empire. Though calling it an empire is incredibly generous for what turned out to be a fragile house of cards held together with loud bravado and criminally bad math. His prized luxury condo project, the Kessler Residences in Montauk, was supposed to be his ultimate masterpiece. 55 stunning waterfront units, a rooftop infinity pool, the whole glossy $1 million brochure fantasy. But the seasoned general contractor suddenly packed up his tools and pulled out completely after Brian arrogantly missed 4 consecutive progress payments. This disaster didn't just happen out of nowhere. Brian had been playing incredibly fast and loose with the legal rules for years. He bypassed essential, strict zoning laws and blatantly forged delicate environmental permits just to speed up the digging on the Montauk dirt. His primary financial backer, a massive, ruthless institutional investor, caught a whiff of the blatant fraud during a routine surprise audit. They pulled out their funding entirely, freezing all of Brian's company assets overnight. The rising panic wasn't just about losing money anymore. It was crossing rapidly into criminal territory. The invisible walls were closing in, and they were closing in incredibly fast. Then the final death blow landed. The primary bank sent a certified notice. Produce $2.2 million in liquid cash within 90 days or face immediate foreclosure on the massive construction loan. Brian started dialing. He was sweating through his custom suits. He frantically called 14 different private equity funds in 3 short weeks. 13 of them took one look at his messy books and said absolutely no. Their basic due diligence easily turned up what any competent freshman accountant would have caught. Massively overvalued collateral, glaringly missing insurance bonds, and exactly $410,000 in shady operating expenses that didn't have a single solitary receipt attached to them. The 14th fund, however, hadn't responded yet. That specific fund was Ashton Capital Partners. They specialized heavily in buying up distressed, failing assets. They were the very last heavy door still open in the city, and Brian was practically crawling toward it on his hands and knees. "If I don't get this meeting, Megan, we lose absolutely everything," Brian told my sister on the phone one late Tuesday night. His usually cocky voice violently cracked in half. "The expensive townhouse, the luxury cars, everything is gone." Brian was desperately begging for a lifeline, completely unaware that the man holding the power to save or destroy his entire life was the exact same day trader he had publicly humiliated over dessert. Meanwhile, across the county, my mother's precious boutique chain was bleeding out quickly. 3 of her 4 Maison Penelope locations had watched their revenue plummet by a terrifying 45%. The shiny veneer of her empire was cracking. Lease renewals were suddenly coming due, and her greedy landlords refused to negotiate a single penny. She desperately needed a massive cash infusion of at least $250,000 just to keep the lights on. Money she definitely did not have and could no longer borrow. At the exact same time, my father, quiet, passive, invisible Robert, had just lost his consulting firm's largest, most vital client. He didn't know yet that the departing client had deep, unshakable connections to Daniel's massive financial network. Nobody in my family knew yet. That was the funny thing about falling dominoes. You never actually hear them toppling over until the very last one smacks hard against the floor. The arrogant family that absolutely refused to drive 3 measly hours for my beautiful wedding was about to discover a life-shattering truth. The ultimate answer to every single one of their mounting problems was currently sitting right across from me, quietly eating toast at my modest breakfast table every morning. The grand revelation happened on a rainy Wednesday. Brian's slick business partner, Gary Miller, was tiredly putting together a desperate pitch deck for Ashton Capital. It was just standard prep work. Research the elusive fund, learn their deep portfolio, find a clever angle to beg for money. He pulled up the firm's sleek website, then casually typed Daniel Ashton, CEO, Ashton Capital, into the Google search bar. The famous Forbes article loaded first. 35 under 35 in private equity. Gary stared blankly at the high-definition profile photo on his glowing monitor. There was Daniel, clean-shaven, quietly confident, wearing a sharp sport coat layered over a crisp white shirt. It was the exact same face, the exact same piercing eyes, the exact same quiet, knowing half-smile Gary had openly mocked across a dinner table in Sedona, Arizona just 4 months ago. Gary stopped breathing. He slowly turned his laptop screen toward Brian and pointed a shaking finger. Isn't this the quiet guy from your wife's sister's wedding invite? The nobody in the flannel shirt at the gender reveal? Brian leaned in close. His arrogant face went from mild confusion to bone-white terror in under 4 seconds. He frantically grabbed his phone and called Megan. Megan shrieked and immediately called Penelope. Penelope dropped her coffee cup and called Robert. Robert practically ripped open his laptop, typed the name into Bloomberg, and watched his entire world tilt on its axis. The financial profile confirmed absolutely everything. Assets under management, $3.1 billion. Founder and CEO Daniel Ashton. I know exactly how this pathetic chain of events played out, because Megan hysterically told Brian. Brian panicked and told Gary. Gary loudly complained to a mutual Manhattan acquaintance, who eventually relayed the whole pathetic drama back to Nina. The game of frantic telephone moved incredibly fast. But what truly struck me, standing in my kitchen as Nina relayed it all over the phone 3 days later, was the one glaring thing nobody said. Not one single person in that entire panicked chain of communication paused to say, "My God, we really should have been at her wedding." Not one. According to Megan's tearful retelling, the very first words that flew out of my mother's perfectly painted mouth were chilling. "This changes absolutely everything. Call her right now. Be nice. Be very nice." 32 years of being completely invisible, I thought, my chest aching with a hollow kind of grief. And her first instinct isn't to apologize for breaking my heart, it's to build a strategy to empty my husband's wallet. I honestly wasn't sure what hurt worse, their original, cruel absence, or their highly calculated, greedy return. Day 41. A bright Saturday morning in late May, I woke up to my cell phone violently vibrating on my wooden nightstand. It was buzzing so hard it was practically trying to vibrate itself right off the edge. I grabbed the device and stared at the glowing screen. It was a suffocating, dense wall of notifications. A rapid-fire list of names I hadn't seen light up my screen in over a month. I numbly scrolled through the absolute madness. 52 missed calls, 96 frantic text messages, 37 rambling voicemails, 54 desperate emails and Facebook pings, 239 individual points of contact from the exact same people who couldn't find 3 tiny hours for a scenic drive to Silver Oak. My mother had left 14 missed calls and 4 breathless voicemails. "Serena, baby, call me back immediately. I miss you so much. Let's do a lovely lunch this week. Bring Daniel. We'd just love to get to know him better." Megan's texts were a rapid-fire string of emojis. "OMG. Sierra, why didn't you tell me? Daniel is like literally famous. We should all totally get together. Brian would love to meet him properly." Brian, the exact same arrogant man who had smugly labeled my husband a day trader to his face, left a painfully slick voicemail that sounded like he had practiced it in his bathroom mirror. "Hey Serena, it's Brian. Listen, I really think Daniel and I got off on the wrong foot back in Sedona. I'd love to buy him a very expensive drink. Talk shop, man to man. Aunt Laura, who had been far too travel exhausted for my wedding, suddenly found her energy. We feel just terrible about missing your big day. When can we come visit your apartment? Aunt Rebecca, fresh off her expensive flight to the Bahamas, suddenly cared about relatives. Serena, thinking of you constantly. Let's plan a big family thing soon. My father sent a single pathetic text message. I'm sorry, Serena. I really should have been there. He was the only person who actually mentioned the wedding directly. But considering his timing, 41 days late, arriving the exact same week the Forbes article rapidly circulated through the family, it felt significantly less like genuine remorse and a whole lot more like a desperate financial recalculation. Daniel sat quietly beside me on the unmade bed, reading the chaotic screen over my trembling shoulder. He didn't boss me around, he didn't tell me what I should do. He just gently kissed my temple and said, "It's your call, Serena. Whatever you decide to do, I am standing right here with you." I slowly set the phone face down on the nightstand. 3 hours had been entirely too far to travel for my heart, but a desperate phone call to a billionaire's new wife? Suddenly that was no distance at all. I didn't answer a single one of them. The doorbell rang sharply on a quiet Friday morning. I wasn't expecting any packages. I cautiously pulled open the heavy door and found my mother standing awkwardly in the dim hallway of my Brooklyn apartment building. She was gripping a generic crate and barrel gift basket like a shield, wearing a stunning Dior wool jacket I'd secretly watched her buy online last fall when she assumed I wasn't paying attention. "Serena?" she gasped. She aggressively pulled me into a suffocating tight hug. It was entirely theatrical, the exact kind of dramatic embrace she usually reserved for public country club performances. "I've missed you so incredibly much, my sweet baby." She pushed her way inside without waiting to be properly invited. Her sharp, calculating eyes darted rapidly around the small space, mentally cataloging my modest life. 1 bedroom, cheap Target shelving, a battered desk covered in messy client mock-ups. Then, her greedy gaze snagged on the large painting hanging directly above my worn couch. It was a breathtaking abstract oil piece in deep, stormy blues and striking silvers. She glanced at it for half a second and immediately moved on. She had absolutely no idea it was a rare original by a highly sought-after Soho gallery artist, a generous wedding gift from Martha Ashton. It had cost $55,000. My mother, obsessed with wealth, walked right past the most expensive thing in the room because it didn't have a recognizable designer logo slapped across the front. She forcefully set the cheap gift basket on my narrow kitchen counter and smoothly pivoted to her actual mission. "So, Daniel works in high-level finance," she chirped, her voice falsely bright. "Brian tells me he's quite accomplished in the city. We would absolutely love to have you both over for a big dinner at our house, like a real family." "You want to have dinner?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "As a family, the exact same family that couldn't be bothered to come to my wedding." "Oh honey, let's not dwell on the negative past," she scolded gently, waving her perfectly manicured hand as if she were simply brushing annoying crumbs off an expensive tablecloth. "You know exactly how chaotic and busy everyone was that month. Now please tell me more about Daniel's fund." "Is he really?" "Mom?" I took a single, firm step forward, cutting her off completely. "You didn't come here today because you suddenly miss your daughter. You came here because you Googled my husband." Her fake bright smile instantly shattered. For one fleeting, terrifying second, the polished mask totally slipped. I saw the ugly, naked flash of intense irritation she usually reserved for retail store managers who dared to question her late returns. "That is incredibly unfair, Serena," she hissed, her tone turning to ice. "I am your mother." "Then start acting like one," I fired back. I marched over and held the front door wide open. She stood frozen in the middle of my small kitchen for 4 full, agonizing seconds. Then, her face hardening into a furious scowl, she snatched up her cheap gift basket and stormed out into the hallway. A minute later, I looked down through my front window and watched her angrily yank open the door of her luxury SUV. Sitting right there in the passenger seat, waiting anxiously for the golden report, was Megan. They had driven down together. They had meticulously planned this pathetic ambush. "You forgot my high school art show. You completely ignored my college graduation. You boycotted my wedding day," I thought, pressing my burning forehead against the cold window glass. "But you magically memorized my husband's net worth." I made a very permanent mental note of that fact. But if I thought kicking my mother out of my apartment was going to stop them, I was dead wrong. The fake sweetness had officially failed. Now they were going to bring the absolute pressure. When fake sweetness failed miserably, my mother instantly switched her tactics to suffocating pressure. Within 72 hours of me forcefully shutting my apartment door in her face, every single device I owned erupted. It was a vicious, highly coordinated harassment campaign that would have deeply impressed a ruthless political action committee. Megan fired the first shot with a frantic phone call. "Seer, Mom is crying. She is really hurt by your cold attitude. You're acting so incredibly selfish right now. All she wanted was to treat you to a nice dinner. Is that honestly so terrible?" Then came Brian. He sent a wildly arrogant email, actually CCing Megan as if this were an official board meeting for his failing company. "Serena, I truly believe there's been a massive misunderstanding between us. I'd love to sit down and discuss a potential business synergy with Daniel. This massive deal could heavily benefit our entire family. Let's set up a quick conference call." Aunt Laura sent a sharp text. "Serena, stop being so difficult. Your mother deeply cares about your future." My father chimed in right behind her. "Please, just come to the house for dinner. It'll all blow over eventually." And then there was Aunt Rebecca. The exact same woman who happily flew to the sunny Bahamas instead of attending my wedding suddenly posted a giant public graphic on Facebook. It read, "Family is absolutely everything." She intentionally tagged my profile so her entire wealthy social circle could witness her profound, completely fake devotion. I blocked 10 separate phone numbers. They relentlessly called from new ones. I quickly blocked those too. They started using total strangers' phones just to reach me. My quiet little apartment suddenly felt like it was under a terrifying siege. They never bothered to knock on this door when I was just plain Serena, I thought, hitting the ignore button for the 20th time. But now that I hold the golden ticket, they are trying to break down the walls. Daniel saw the heavy toll it was taking on me. He gently offered to step in and crush it. He could have made one single terrifying phone call, one chilling sentence from the untouchable CEO of Ashton Capital, and the harassment would have instantly evaporated. But I shook my head. "No," I whispered fiercely. "If you fight this ugly battle for me, they will never actually respect me. They'll just fear your immense power. And that is not what I want to build my life on." When the endless phone calls didn't break me, Brian took a dangerous step. He escalated things to a physical level. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, he showed up completely unannounced at my private Brooklyn design studio. As I walked toward the elevators, he suddenly lunged out from behind a concrete pillar, aggressively cornering me. His face was blotchy and dark red. He was visibly sweating right through his expensive, custom-tailored suit. "Serena, you need to listen to me right now," he demanded, stepping dangerously deep into my personal space. Panic flared wildly in his wide eyes. "You know exactly what family means. You've always been the quiet one who compromises. You're the one who always smooths things over for us. Just do it one more time. Make the damn call to Daniel. We are losing absolutely everything." He forcefully raised his hand, trying to grab my bare arm. He didn't even get an inch closer. A massive, unyielding hand clamped down brutally hard onto Brian's shaking shoulder. It was Marcus, Daniel's personal head of security. He was a towering ex-military contractor who somehow moved across the marble floor without making a single sound. Daniel had quietly assigned him to secretly shadow me the very day the intense harassment campaign began. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just stared dead into Brian's terrified eyes and spoke in a low, terrifying rumble. "Sir, you are trespassing on private property. Leave this building right now, or you will leave it wearing tight steel handcuffs." Brian violently stumbled backward, instantly going completely pale. He was physically shaking, yet his desperate eyes still darted back to me, silently begging me to magically save him from the mess he had created. I looked him dead in the eye, feeling an icy calm wash over my entire body. "My hourly rate is way out of your reach now, Brian," I said softly, my voice echoing off the tile walls. "Get out." It was that precise, freezing moment, that utter, public humiliation in my studio lobby, that drove them to their most desperate, emotionally violent act yet. Daniel didn't push me to talk about the terrifying lobby incident when I finally got home. Instead, he quietly went into the kitchen and made me dinner. A warm bowl of pasta with fresh lemon and salty capers, paired perfectly with a chilled glass of the exact same crisp Chardonnay we had happily served at our vineyard wedding. We ate together in absolute silence, but that silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like an impenetrable, glowing fortress. My family mistakenly thought I was just being childishly stubborn. They had absolutely no idea I was being coldly deliberate. The ultimate emotional trap arrived via voicemail at 10:22 on a dark Thursday night. My mother's voice flowed through the tiny phone speaker. It was trembling, shockingly soft, and deeply fractured in a vulnerable way I had maybe heard only 4 times in my entire existence. "Serena? Honey," she cried softly, her breath hitching. "I know I haven't been a perfect parent. I know I've made terrible mistakes, but I am still your mother. Whatever horrible thing happened, whatever I did wrong to hurt you, please, don't shut me out in the cold. I am literally begging you." I sat alone on the edge of my unmade bed, hugging my knees to my chest. I hit replay and listened to that agonizing message 4 separate times. My ribs ached. Hot, stinging tears slid down my cheeks without my permission. She sounded so incredibly real. She sounded utterly broken. And heaven help me, I almost called her right back. My shaking thumb hovered dangerously over the bright green call button. Every painful childhood memory of standing awkwardly in that Scarsdale kitchen, desperately wanting to be told I was enough, but clearly never being enough for them, violently fought against the wounded 15-year-old girl still living deep inside my ribs. "She's crying for me," the little girl whispered. "She finally wants me." Daniel appeared quietly in the bedroom doorway. He didn't speak a word. He didn't move forward to stop me, nor did he pull away. He simply stood there, a steady anchor in the raging storm. In the heavy quiet, I finally pulled my thumb away from my mother's contact. I called Nina instead. "She sounded so real, Nina," I choked out, wiping my wet face. "Maybe I am actually being way too hard on them." Nina's voice through the receiver was incredibly gentle, yet coated in pure, unyielding steel. "Open the digital folder, Sarah. Read those text messages again. Read exactly what she said about your most important day. Then you can decide." I slowly opened my laptop. The harsh blue light of the glowing screen filled the dark bedroom. I clicked open the secure folder labeled Receipts, and pulled up a specific damning screenshot from exactly 3 days before I walked down the aisle. It was a vicious message my mother had originally sent to Megan, which my sister had accidentally forwarded to the wrong family group chat. It read, "Don't waste your beautiful Saturday on Serena's little ceremony. She will be totally fine. She always is." That was the exact message she had secretly blasted out to every single family member. That was the real reason absolutely no one showed up. It wasn't about travel distance. It wasn't about busy schedules. It was Penelope Thompson deliberately, quietly telling 28 relatives that her eldest daughter's wedding simply wasn't worth a few hours of their precious time. I gently closed the laptop lid. I wiped my face completely dry. Then I thought back to the very last time I had actually heard my mother sob like that. It was 4 years ago, when she desperately wanted my reluctant father to blindly co-sign a loan for her risky boutique expansion. She wasn't crying on this voicemail because she had deeply hurt my feelings. She was crying because her golden ATM was slipping away. She was crying because I had finally stopped being useful. Let me pause and ask you something. Please, be brutally honest with yourself. Have you ever caught someone crying massive crocodile tears? That sickening light bulb moment when you suddenly realize the dramatic tears aren't falling for you at all. They are only falling for what they selfishly need to extract from you. If you know that exact hollow feeling, drop a crocodile emoji in the comments below. And if you are eagerly wondering what I did next, trust me on this. I spent weeks meticulously planning my next move. Stay with me, because the silence was officially over, and I was about to walk right into the lion's den wearing the heaviest armor they had ever seen. I sat firmly at my small kitchen table the following Saturday morning. Daniel was anchored on my left, solid and calm. Nina sat sharply on my right, her lawyer instincts fully awake. 3 heavy mugs of coffee were slowly cooling between us. A yellow legal pad rested directly in front of my hands. My handwriting across the top line was small, neat, and strikingly even. "I am honestly not trying to destroy them," I said softly, breathing in the bitter scent of the dark roast. "And I truly meant it. But I am officially done pretending their toxic behavior is acceptable. If they want professional access to Daniel, they have to go through the exact same rigorous process as anyone else in this city. There is absolutely no family discount on basic human decency. I am removing the bridge," I told myself. "Let them figure out how to swim." Daniel leaned slowly back in his wooden chair, his dark eyes serious. "You should probably know something. Brian actually submitted a formal pitch deck to Ashton Capital 3 weeks ago. He went through our standard intake portal. My acquisitions team immediately flagged it." "Flagged it how?" I asked, my pulse ticking slightly faster. 3 massive red flags, Daniel explained. his voice slipping effortlessly into boardroom mode. First, Brian violently overvalued his pledged collateral by roughly 35%. Second, his sprawling construction project is glaringly missing a legally required insurance bond. And third, there is exactly $410,000 in mysterious operating expenses that simply cannot be accounted for. No professional invoices, no vendor receipts, just vague typed line items with zero supporting documentation. He paused, letting the heavy weight of the numbers settle over the table. My team was preparing to formally reject his entire proposal long before any of this family drama exploded. The math simply does not work. Nina looked across the table at me, a sharp glint in her eyes. So, the shady deal dies purely on its own miserable merits. Exactly, Daniel confirmed smoothly. I didn't reject his project because he was cruel to Serena. I rejected him because his business foundation is fundamentally rotten. That specific distinction matters, both legally and personally. I nodded slowly. The looming plan wasn't overly complicated. I didn't need to craft a wicked scheme or manipulate the chessboard. I just needed to completely stop intervening. I needed to stop smoothing things over and permanently resign from my lifelong job as the invisible, unappreciated bridge between my family's self-inflicted disasters and the golden solutions they hadn't earned. There was just one looming complication, though. The massive Harrison Foundation charity gala was exactly 4 weeks away. Daniel was proudly receiving their prestigious annual leadership award. 500 wealthy guests, strict black tie attire. If my desperate family somehow found out about the high-profile event, and I was absolutely certain their greedy radar would catch it, they would forcefully invite themselves. Nina silently slid a slim black binder across the smooth table. Inside were freshly printed screenshots, carefully scanned RSVP cards, and the glaring mileage comparison chart I had typed up. Just in case, she whispered, tapping the dark cover. This isn't a weapon, Sarah. It is just a mirror. I stared at the binder. I didn't need petty revenge. I just needed them to finally stop lying to themselves about exactly who they were. The official rejection letter arrived at the Kessler Development Group offices on a dreary Tuesday morning. It was beautifully delivered on heavy, cream-colored Ashton capital letterhead, printed on 100-pound cotton stock with a deeply embossed gold logo. It was formally signed by the VP of Acquisitions, not Daniel. That was standard operating procedure. The busy CEO never personally signed routine deal rejections. But Brian didn't know that. To him, the letter was 3 short paragraphs of chilling professional courtesy wrapped tightly around a lethal verdict. After a thorough due diligence review, the overall risk profile of the Kessler residences does not meet our current strict investment criteria, specifically noting the severe overvaluation of pledged collateral, inadequate construction insurance bonds, and highly unresolved discrepancies in reported operating expenses. Brian read the crisp paper while standing frozen in his lavish office. Then, his knees buckled. He sat down heavily in his leather chair. He put his sweating face directly into his trembling hands. The golden ticket just burned up. I imagined him realizing, the empire is officially built on quicksand. He frantically called Megan that exact same afternoon. I learned much later, again through the invisible gossip chain that always led straight back to Nina's sharp ears, that it was the very first time my sister had ever heard her arrogant husband sob. That evening, a deeply desperate Brian tried to bypass the rules and reach Daniel directly. He cowardly called the main Ashton Capital office line. The seasoned receptionist was unfailingly polite, yet entirely immovable. Mr. Ashton does not accept unsolicited personal calls, she stated firmly. If you would like to submit a formal financial inquiry, I can happily provide the appropriate general email address. Brian hung up. He sat completely alone in his dark, echoing parking garage for 30 agonizing minutes. Then he dialed Penelope. I need Serena to force Daniel to reconsider, he begged, his voice cracking wildly. If she doesn't do this for us, we are totally done. We lose the Bronxville townhouse. We lose absolutely everything. My mother, the exact same woman who had ruthlessly instructed 28 relatives to happily skip my wedding, replied with 4 chilling words. Leave it to me. Within a single week, she had aggressively purchased a premium table at the upcoming Harrison Foundation charity gala, $6,000, all for a temporary seat in the exact same lavish room as the billionaire son-in-law she had never once bothered to properly meet. $6,000 just to desperately fix what a simple 3-hour scenic drive would have permanently prevented. The sickening irony sat heavy in my chest, feeling exactly like a swallowed stone. While Brian scrambled wildly in the dark, My mother's own beloved empire was rapidly collapsing around her perfectly manicured fingernails. Maison Penelope operated 4 prime retail locations across wealthy Westchester County. That brutal spring, 3 of them suddenly received certified lease renewal notices demanding a shocking 40% rent increase. The greedy landlords were absolutely done negotiating. Online shopping had been viciously eating into her daily foot traffic for several years, and Penelope's brilliant business response had been to blindly ignore the digital age entirely. The truly bitter part? I had eagerly offered to help her, 3 painful years earlier, sitting quietly at that exact same Sunday dinner table, pushed toward the swinging kitchen door. I enthusiastically told her I could personally design a stunning, full e-commerce website for Maison Penelope, a complete brand identity refresh, a sleek online store, and seamless social media integration. I offered to do it entirely for free, a loving gift from a devoted daughter. My mother had smiled tightly, the exact condescending way she smiled at foolish children who said something incredibly naive. "Sweetie, please just stick to your little drawings. High-end retail is a completely different world." You didn't want my help when I was worthless, I thought. Now my little drawings are the only thing that can save you. Now that different world was violently closing its jaws on her. She desperately needed at least $250,000 in raw cash just to keep her 2 best locations barely afloat. Money to rapidly cover pending lease renewals, massive stacks of back vendor invoices, and a bloated payroll she had been frantically juggling for months. The impatient bank demanded a wealthy cosigner or a massive outside investor. She had absolutely neither, but when she heard a panicked Brian talking endlessly about Ashton Capital, something dark and sharp clicked in her mind. I could clearly see it forming, even from a safe distance. The cold calculation, the dramatic pivot. If Daniel's endless money could somehow save Brian's sinking condo project, maybe he could magically save her failing boutiques too. 2 massive, life-destroying problems. 1 incredibly convenient billionaire son-in-law. She forcefully called my passive father that same evening. "We absolutely need to be at that Manhattan gala, Robert. Whatever it costs." Robert had a loose business contact working at the Harrison Foundation. He nervously bought the table, $6,000 that Penelope absolutely did not have, recklessly charged to a high-interest credit card she was already severely behind on. Martha Ashton called my cell phone the very day after the massive purchase went through. "Darling," she murmured, her sharp tone layered with deep concern. "A woman named Thompson just frantically reserved a premium table at the gala. Is that your family?" I slowly looked out the massive glass window at the rushing Hudson River, watching the water turn a brilliant shimmering silver in the late afternoon light. It was the tense night before the massive gala. I stood quietly in the center of Daniel's sprawling Manhattan penthouse, carefully trying on the breathtaking dress he had personally picked out for me. Giorgio Armani, pure black, floor-length silk. It was a clean, remarkably quiet kind of beautiful, the rare kind of elegance that never loudly announces itself, but firmly stays burned in the room's memory long after you have walked away. I still fiercely kept my tiny 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. I hadn't given the cheap lease up. "That is exactly who I was before this," I had told Daniel once, my voice fierce. "I never ever want to forget her." The luxurious penthouse featured towering, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark river. The bright, pulsing lights of the iconic Empire State Building shimmered beautifully across the choppy water. I stood perfectly still in front of the massive, full-length mirror in the marble foyer, and just looked at myself. 32 years old, swathed in stunning Giorgio Armani, a flawless emerald ring catching the warm lamplight. But looking deep into my own reflection, all I could actually see was a terrified, heartbroken 15-year-old girl named Serena, standing alone on a bright wooden stage in Albany, clutching a heavy brass plaque, desperately staring out at an empty row of folding chairs, waiting for a mother who was never going to arrive. Daniel walked softly into the foyer, stepping up close behind me. His warm hands gently rested on my bare shoulders. "You really don't have to say a single word to them tomorrow night," he murmured into my hair. "Just showing up and being there is more than enough." "No," I whispered. I reached up and carefully adjusted the sleek silk neckline. "They absolutely need to hear it. Not for me. I am doing it for the fragile version of me that stood on that stage at 15 and had to go home crying with her art teacher." The stage was finally set. The heavy velvet curtains were about to rise, and my family had absolutely no idea they had just bought front-row tickets to their own devastating destruction. The doorbell rang sharply at 10 o'clock that night. Nina swept into the penthouse foyer, carrying the slim black binder tightly against her chest. Inside were the printed digital folders, neatly tabbed and enclosed in a dark leather cover. She set it gently down on the cold marble kitchen counter and looked up at me. "Just in case," she whispered, her eyes fierce and protective. I slowly reached out and picked it up. It physically felt so light, just a few crisp pages of screenshots, a handful of scanned RSVP cards, and a typed transcription of one single cruel phone call. That was absolutely all it took, but as I held it, every single page carried the crushing weight of a promise someone had carelessly broken and never once bothered to mend. They built a wall out of silence, I thought, tracing the binder's edge. Tonight I bring the sledgehammer. I looked at myself in the massive mirror one last time. I had spent 32 painful years actively making myself small enough to comfortably fit inside their selfish expectations. Tomorrow night I would finally stand at my full height. The Harrison Foundation Charity Gala was held inside the breathtaking New York Public Library in Manhattan. It felt like walking into a massive, glowing cathedral. Giant Corinthian columns rose 85 feet up into a spectacularly vaulted, painted ceiling. 500 elite guests swirled around the grand floor in flawless black tie attire. A live chamber orchestra played soft Debussy near the south atrium. Expensive crystal champagne sparkled on every single table. Over $250,000 had already been raised for crucial education nonprofits before the very first speech was even given. Daniel and I arrived in a sleek, quiet town car. He looked incredibly sharp in a custom Giorgio Armani tuxedo. I carried a tiny, structured Prada clutch, just barely big enough to hold my phone and a few neatly folded sheets of paper. Inside, the massive hall literally hummed with invisible power. Fortune 500 CEOs, cutthroat fund managers, 2 sitting state senators, and a former presidential cabinet secretary. They all seemed to know Daniel. Powerful men enthusiastically shook his hand. Wealthy women kissed my cheek, and everyone eagerly congratulated us on the upcoming award. "You must be the famous Serena." One elegant, silver-haired woman smiled warmly, grasping my hands. "Daniel absolutely never stops talking about you." I smiled back. I shook their hands. I belonged here. And then, across the sprawling room practically pressed against the far shadowy wall at table 18 like a forgotten afterthought, I finally saw them. My mother was wearing a bright red dress from Bloomingdale's. It was trying its absolute hardest to look like something significantly more expensive, but under the harsh crystal chandeliers it just looked desperate. Brian was stuffed into a dark suit that pulled awkwardly across his broad shoulders, a glaring physical symbol of a man whose lavish lifestyle no longer fit his empty bank account. Megan sat slumped, 7 months pregnant, nervously clutching her small beaded handbag. My father sat completely frozen, his hands tucked uselessly in his lap, staring blankly down at the pristine white tablecloth. They hadn't seen me yet. Their eager, hungry eyes were frantically scanning the crowded room, desperately searching for Daniel Ashton. They were hunting for the golden name printed on the fancy program, the wealthy face from the glossy Forbes article. They had absolutely no idea I was already standing there, a mere 30 feet away, quietly watching them search for their savior. The polished MC confidently stepped up to the glowing podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming tonight's esteemed honoree, the visionary founder of Ashton Capital Partners, and this year's Harrison Leadership Award recipient, Daniel Ashton." Daniel stood up slowly. I stood proudly right beside him. 500 powerful people erupted into thunderous applause, and way in the back, at table 18, my mother's crystal champagne glass froze halfway to her bright red lips. For the very first time in my entire life, I saw an emotion flash across her perfectly made-up face that I had never witnessed before. Pure, unadulterated fear. Daniel spoke effortlessly for 6 minutes. He was incredibly gracious, razor-sharp, and deeply warm in a rare way that only someone who genuinely does not care about cheap applause can be. He spoke passionately about the Harrison Foundation's vital work in underfunded city schools. He discussed the heavy moral responsibility of managing massive capital. He easily made a room full of terrifyingly powerful people laugh twice and silently reflect once. Then he paused. The massive hall went dead silent. He looked away from the crowd and turned his dark eyes directly onto me. "I want to close tonight by thanking the one person who constantly reminds me, every single day, that true success is never measured by what giant empires you build," Daniel said, his voice echoing perfectly off the vaulted ceilings. "It is entirely measured by who bravely stands beside you when you had absolutely nothing to offer them." My beautiful wife, Serena. The blinding white spotlight instantly found me. I stood tall. 500 elite guests rose to their feet in a massive, roaring wave of applause that filled the vast hall from the cold marble floor to the painted ceiling. At table 18, the blood completely drained from my mother's face. She looked like a ghost. Megan gripped Brian's arm so tightly her knuckles glowed stark white. Brian's jaw was rigidly locked. My father slowly looked down at his expensive dinner plate, looking as though the devastating answer to his entire wasted life might be written in the fine porcelain. Right after the speech ended and the applause faded into excited chatter, I watched them physically move. Penelope stood up first. I saw her anxiously smooth down her red dress, lift her chin high, and practically plaster on that bright, glossy, terrifying smile she wore like thick metal armor. She ruthlessly cut through the dense crowd, with Megan and Brian awkwardly trailing right behind her like a pathetic motorcade. "Serena!" she gasped loudly, throwing her arms wide open. "Oh my God, just look at you. We are so incredibly proud of you, honey." She confidently reached out to grab me, fully expecting me to play along in front of 3 wealthy couples who were clearly watching our interaction. It was a highly calculated embrace, explicitly designed for an audience. I didn't step forward. I didn't move a single muscle. My arms stayed glued tightly to my sides. "Hi, Mom," I replied, my voice chillingly calm. "Strange seeing you here in the city. You couldn't manage to make it to the Catskills for my wedding, but I guess Manhattan works." Her fake smile cracked, just a tiny fraction of an inch. "Oh, please don't be silly, darling," she brushed off quickly, her eyes darting nervously to the listening bystanders. "We are here to proudly support you. You are here because Brian's failing company desperately needs $5.1 million. That single sentence landed on the floor like a dropped crystal glass shattering on hard marble. The 3 wealthy couples nearby slowly turned around, their eyes wide. 2 prominent Harrison board members standing just a few feet behind my mother went completely, breathlessly still. The agonizing silence between us lasted only 4 seconds, but it held the crushing weight of 32 long years. My mother recovered incredibly fast. She always did. "Serena, please," she hissed under her breath, her eyes flashing dangerously. "This is absolutely not the place for this." "You're exactly right," I fired back, my voice steady as a surgeon's blade. "The proper place was Silver Oak Vineyard, April 18th. Exactly 3 hours away from your front door. But you weren't there." Brian aggressively stepped forward, his tone low, urgent, and dripping with panicked sweat. "Serena, come on, let's take this conversation somewhere completely private. I have a massive, highly profitable proposal for Daniel." I slowly reached down and unclasped my small Prada clutch. I calmly took out a single, neatly folded page and held it directly out toward his chest. "This is the exact text message you arrogantly sent Megan the week of my wedding," I stated clearly, ensuring my voice carried to the listening board members. "You mockingly called my marriage Serena's little thing. Your exact typed words were, 'Why would I ever waste a prime Saturday on that?'" Brian stared at the crisp white paper like it was actively on fire. He refused to touch it. Serena, that's taken completely out of context." I slowly turned my focus back to my mother. My hands weren't shaking. My breathing wasn't erratic. I wasn't even raising my voice. I am not the victim anymore, I realized, feeling a massive surge of pure adrenaline. I am the judge, and this, I continued, smoothly pulling out a second printed page, is the secret mass message you viciously sent to every single family member, strictly ordering them not to attend my ceremony. Don't waste your Saturday on Serena's little ceremony. She'll be fine. She always is." Penelope's painted mouth fell open. Absolutely no sound came out. She blinked, her brain misfiring. I never, that's simply not true." "Mom, I have the digital screenshot," I interrupted, cutting her off at the knees. "Megan forwarded it to the wrong group chat by accident. I saved it." Megan suddenly started to cry, her shoulders shaking violently under her maternity dress. "Sir, please stop. You're making a massive public scene." I looked directly at my beautiful, pregnant, terrified younger sister. "No, Megan," I replied softly yet firmly. "You made a scene. Your scene was draped in lavender balloons. It cost $50,000 and everyone happily flew to the scorching Arizona desert for it. I just wanted 3 tiny hours of their time. I got absolutely none." The trap had violently snapped shut around them, but the true devastation of their actions was only just beginning to bleed out onto the marble floor. The invisible circle of listeners pressing around us had silently grown. A prominent Harrison board member stood merely 4 feet to my left, his expensive champagne glass completely forgotten in his hand. A sharp-eyed reporter from the Capital Business Review lingered 15 feet behind my trembling mother, her ears wide open. Nobody dared to speak a single syllable. Nobody tried to intervene. They just watched the flawless Thompson family image bleed out onto the expensive marble floor. You desperately wanted an audience your whole life, Mom, I thought, my heart beating a steady, fearless drum against my ribs. Well, now you finally have one. I neatly folded the damning printed pages, slid them smoothly back into my dark Prada clutch, and snapped the gold clasp shut. The sharp metal click echoed like a tiny gunshot. You didn't come to my wedding because my joy simply wasn't worth your precious time, I stated clearly, refusing to blink or look away. You are only standing here tonight because my husband's deep pockets are suddenly worth your desperate effort. I know the exact difference, and now, so does every single powerful person in this room. Brian forcefully dropped his slick, arrogant pretense. His normally booming voice violently cracked open like wet, crumbling plaster. Serena, please come on. This is strict business. You absolutely cannot let petty personal feelings ruin a massive coastal deal worth millions. Daniel smoothly stepped forward, breaking his silent observation. He had been standing exactly 6 feet behind me this entire time, his hands loosely clasped, proudly letting me fight my own fierce battle. But now he took the wheel. His voice was terrifyingly calm, that chilling, absolute boardroom calm that instantly makes loud, aggressive men go totally quiet. The Kessler Residence's deal was formally rejected 4 complete weeks ago, Mr. Kessler, Daniel declared, his tone pure steel. Your messy financials fundamentally failed to meet our strict investment criteria. It had absolutely nothing to do with Serena. Brian stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. You can't. The panicked words went absolutely nowhere. He looked exactly like a confused man who had just sprinted full speed into a thick brick wall he couldn't see. My mother frantically tried one last pathetic play. She reached out, her shaking fingers forcefully closing around my bare wrist. Honey, she pleaded, her eyes wide, wet, and desperate. I am your own mother. You cannot legally or morally do this to your blood family. I pulled my hand back incredibly gently, treating her tight grip like releasing a cheap balloon into the evening sky. You actively chose exactly which family members you wanted to show up for, Penelope. I am just respectfully honoring your clear choice. Megan was openly sobbing now. Dark mascara rapidly stained her pale cheeks. She protectively placed one trembling hand over her swollen belly. This just isn't fair, Serena. I'm about to have a baby, and I truly hope you always show up for her, I whispered, the blazing anger suddenly draining into profound, exhausting sadness. Exactly the way nobody ever showed up for me. The glowing room held its collective breath. My passive father, Robert, hadn't spoken a single word. He awkwardly stood at the very edge of the tense group, slightly hiding behind Brian, his hands shoved deeply into his suit pockets. Finally, he nervously cleared his throat and said the one thing he should have boldly declared 41 days ago in a sunny vineyard under blooming dogwood trees. Serena, I am so sorry, I really should have come. I looked closely at his exhausted face. For one brief, blindingly honest second, I desperately wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to be that innocent 15-year-old girl who still foolishly thought her dad was just a quiet man, rather than a cowardly accomplice. I know you are, Dad, I replied, my voice painfully hollow. But saying sorry 41 days late, while standing at a billionaire's charity gala, isn't actually an apology. It is just a financial strategy. I firmly turned my back on them, took Daniel's waiting arm, and gracefully walked away toward the main VIP table. Martha Ashton sat there quietly waiting for us. Her gentle smile was small, incredibly warm, and beautifully real. Right behind me, Penelope Thompson stood totally frozen in the middle of 500 elite guests, and for the very first time in her entire theatrical life, she could not think of a single manipulative thing to say. The rest of the elegant evening played out exactly like a harsh temperature map. Freezing cold visibly radiated outward from table 18, while genuine warmth glowed happily everywhere else. My ruined family stayed glued to their seats. Not one single person in that vast hall walked over to greet them. The 2 influential board members who had clearly overheard the brutal exchange smoothly moved to completely opposite corners of the sprawling library. One of those listeners was a sharp woman named Harper Caldwell. She just so happened to be my father's absolute biggest consulting client. I watched from afar as she leaned toward her wealthy husband, whispering something I couldn't hear. She never once glanced in my father's direction again. Brian arrogantly tried his luck one last time. He aggressively approached a seasoned hedge fund manager near the brass bar. introducing himself and frantically pitching his Montauk condos in under 90 breathless seconds. The older man slowly sipped his expensive bourbon, looked Brian up and down with obvious disgust, and replied, "I strongly suggest you focus on fixing your messy family situation first, Mr. Kessler." Then, he turned his back and walked away. Megan didn't even stay for the decadent chocolate dessert. She hid inside the marble bathroom and cried hysterically for 15 minutes before quietly ordering a lonely Uber home. Penelope nervously chugged 4 flutes of sparkling champagne in under 30 minutes. She became so visibly unsteady that Robert had to awkwardly escort her out to the dark lobby. His gray face looked like it had been permanently carved from rough stone. Meanwhile, back at our glowing table, Daniel proudly introduced me to the brilliant director of the Harrison Foundation. She was actively searching for a fresh designer to completely rebrand their massive national education initiative, a new visual identity, digital campaign, and bold outreach materials. We talked passionately for 50 minutes. She absolutely loved my digital portfolio. She eagerly praised my creative ideas. Most importantly, she never once mentioned Daniel's powerful name during our entire professional conversation. Martha reached under the silk tablecloth and squeezed my hand tightly. "You handled that ugly ambush with significantly more grace than those people ever deserved, Serena," she murmured. That observant reporter from the Capital Business Review hadn't missed a beat. She didn't write a trashy gossip piece about the family confrontation. She had way too much professional tact for that. But the very following week, she proudly published a glowing feature article, "The Quiet Power Couple: How Ashton Capital's CEO and his brilliant designer wife are redefining modern philanthropy." My shattered family read every single glowing word. I know this as a fact because Nina told me they furiously shared the digital link inside their panicked group chat. The exact same chat I had finally permanently exited. Exactly 1 week after the dazzling gala, the merciless bank made it totally official. Brian entirely failed to secure the required replacement funding within his strict 90-day window. The massive construction loan on the Montauk project was forcefully foreclosed. The highly contested property instantly reverted back to the angry lender. Brian's personal equity, nearly $950,000 in raw cash he had blindly poured in over 3 stressful years, was completely wiped out. 55 promised luxury condos permanently became a depressing half-finished concrete skeleton overlooking the cold ocean. He humiliatingly filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The Kessler Development Group ceased to exist overnight. Their pristine $1.5 million Bronxville townhouse went straight onto the harsh market at a massive financial loss. A devastated Megan silently packed up her expensive designer clothes, at least what was left of them, into her mother's luxury SUV and moved right back into her childhood bedroom inside the Scarsdale Colonial. But the absolute most sickening, heart-wrenching blow didn't actually come from my frantic mother or my weeping sister. It came directly from my father. 2 dreary days after the gala, Robert bravely asked to meet me alone at a quiet, run-down diner in Queens. I hesitantly went, against all my better judgment. A tiny piece of my battered heart hoped that the passive man who had stayed completely silent for 32 years was finally ready to be a real dad. He sat nervously across the sticky booth from me, looking deeply exhausted. His wrinkled hands were visibly trembling near his cold coffee mug. "Serena," he whispered, looking paranoid as his eyes darted around the empty diner. "Your mother was completely wrong. She has totally lost her mind. I never actually agreed with the horrible things she did to you. I am on your side, sweetie. I always have been." My damaged heart actually fluttered for one beautiful second. He sees me, I thought, a lump forming in my throat. He finally sees me. Until he took a deep, shaky breath and continued speaking. "I am officially separating from her," he confessed, leaning closer. "But my consulting business is going completely under because of her ruined social reputation. I just desperately need a $100,000 bridge loan to survive. Daniel is so rich he won't even notice that tiny amount is gone. Please, Serena, just to help your poor old man get back on his feet." I stared blankly at his tired face. He wasn't apologizing at all. He was just desperately abandoning a rapidly sinking ship and trying his absolute hardest to board my luxury yacht. He didn't love me any more than Penelope did. He had simply run the cold math and finally realized I was the far better investment. I slowly stood up from the cracked vinyl booth. I placed a crisp $20 bill on the table to cover the cheap coffee. Then, I turned my back and walked right out the glass door without saying a single solitary word. That was the exact, devastating moment the invisible door to my childhood permanently locked forever. I thought the nightmare was finally over. I thought my family had officially hit rock bottom. but losing their fake wealth wasn't the ultimate punishment. The true, earth-shattering destruction was currently hiding deep inside Brian's shattered company records, waiting silently in the dark for my pregnant sister to uncover it. Then the second, far more devastating crack violently split open. While miserably sorting through Brian's disorganized company accounts during the humiliating bankruptcy filing, Megan accidentally found exactly what the Ashton Capital due diligence team had already flagged: the mysterious $410,000 in vague operating expenses with absolutely no attached receipts. Sitting alone on the floor of her half-packed Bronxville townhouse, my pregnant sister started aggressively pulling the raw financial records. She dug up heavily concealed credit card statements. She found lavish luxury hotel invoices in random cities where Brian definitely had zero active construction projects. She stared in horror at endless, wildly expensive restaurant charges for two, and finally the ultimate death blow: a signed lease for a breathtaking hidden apartment out in the Hamptons, secretly registered under a fake LLC she had never even heard of. Brian had been actively carrying on a passionate affair with his young office manager for 7 consecutive months. He was sleeping with another woman through the absolute entirety of Megan's highly publicized pregnancy, through the extravagant gender reveal party, through the matching peach sundresses, even through the ridiculous $50,000 celebration at the Four Seasons. He had been texting his mistress from the bathroom, completely shattered, sobbing uncontrollably, and desperately looking for her mother's warm, protective embrace. Megan drove straight to the Scarsdale boutique to confront Penelope with the undeniable, printed proof of Brian's sickening infidelity. But Penelope Thompson did not hug her weeping daughter. She didn't offer a single shred of maternal comfort or righteous anger. Instead, Penelope coldly walked over, firmly closed the heavy boutique office door, lowered her voice to a furious whisper, and said, "Wipe your face immediately, Megan. Do not dare make a massive public scandal out of this. If you quickly file for divorce right now, it will make us look like we are completely falling apart. You will stay quietly married to him until the messy bankruptcy fully clears. Think of our family image." In that freezing, sterile, devastating moment, the glittering illusion permanently shattered. Megan finally painfully saw what I had already seen my entire lonely life. Our mother didn't actually love us. She only loved the cheering audience. Megan realized that the very second her perfect Instagram-curated life became ugly and messy, she was just as easily disposable to Penelope as I had always been. The golden child finally learned that the gold was just cheap, peeling paint, I thought later, feeling a sharp twinge of profound pity for her. Megan called me at 3 o'clock in the morning. Her voice was raw, ragged, and entirely stripped of its usual bubbly influencer inflection. The casual entitlement and the easy, arrogant confidence of being the undisputed family favorite were completely gone. "Seer," she choked out, her breath hitching painfully into the dark receiver. "I honestly didn't know about any of it. The fake numbers, the other woman, his awful lies. I am so sorry. And not just about Daniel. I am so sorry about everything. About how I treated you." I lay perfectly still in the dark. I listened to her weep. I didn't angrily hang up the phone, but I didn't rush to comfort her either. "I will think about it, Megan," I finally whispered, my voice incredibly gentle but firm. "But not tonight." I slowly set the phone face down on my nightstand. Daniel was wide awake right beside me, silently watching the ceiling shadows. That midnight confession was the very first genuine, honest thing my younger sister had said to me in years. But one tearful phone call at 3 a.m., with her entire fake world burning down around her ears, did not magically erase what 28 solid years of cruel silence had built. Meanwhile, Maison Penelope violently bled out. My mother was forced to permanently close 2 retail locations by the bitter end of June. The crucial lease renewals came and went without a single signature. The massive White Plains store went totally dark on a rainy Wednesday. The Yonkers shop rapidly followed the very next week. The expensive brass racks that once proudly held beautiful silk blouses and imported Italian leather bags were ruthlessly stripped down to bare metal. Bright neon lease available signs were taped up in both windows before the long month was even out. 2 struggling stores still remained, but they were severely hemorrhaging cash every single day. But the brutal social fallout was significantly quieter and infinitely deeper. The elite country club set in Scarsdale actively operated on vicious gossip the exact same way most natural ecosystems operate on oxygen. Someone who had been at the library gala, or who closely knew someone who had been at the gala, eagerly whispered to someone on the powerful spring luncheon committee about exactly what Penelope Thompson had done. She maliciously told her whole family not to go to her own daughter's tiny wedding, and then that same daughter secretly married a literal billionaire. That single devastating sentence moved through Penelope's wealthy social circle like a highly contagious, slow-acting poison. The ruthless committee chair called her the very following week. "We strongly feel the luncheon committee needs some fresh, vibrant energy this upcoming season, Penelope. I am absolutely sure you understand." At the exact same time, Harper Caldwell made her lethal move. The powerful board member, who was also my father's most lucrative remaining client, swiftly moved her massive consulting contract to a completely different, younger firm. She stared Robert directly in the eye and coldly told him, "I require someone I can implicitly trust with my family's legacy." He didn't even try to argue. He knew he couldn't. My desperate mother frantically tried one final, pathetic play on social media. She aggressively posted a vintage childhood photo of me on her Facebook page. I was gap-toothed, with bright blue paint smeared all over my tiny fingers, grinning happily into the camera lens at age 8. The sickly sweet caption read, "My beautiful, talented firstborn, I am so incredibly proud of everything you have magically become." I stared at the fake post, feeling absolutely nothing but cold pity. I clinically reported the post to the platform, and then I permanently blocked her account. There was a haunting moment. Nina quietly told me about it weeks later, when Penelope sat completely alone inside the main Maison Penelope location long after closing time. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed loudly above her. The display racks were half empty and pathetic. The tall dressing room mirrors coldly reflected a terrified woman sitting slumped on a velvet ottoman, left with absolutely no audience and no script to read from. "When did I become this awful person?" she reportedly asked the empty, echoing store, crying into her hands. But she still didn't pick up the phone to actually apologize to me. Instead, she desperately called my old studio to ask if I would reconsider having Daniel briefly look at her failing business plan. That horrific request told me absolutely everything I ever needed to know. Exactly 4 weeks after the explosive gala, I sat down at the battered wooden desk inside my tiny Brooklyn apartment, the exact one I still proudly kept. The one covered with messy client mock-ups and illuminated by the chipped Target lamp. I pulled out 5 sheets of heavy Smithson stationery and I slowly wrote out letters, one for each of them. I wrote them entirely by hand, using a beautiful Parker fountain pen Martha Ashton had lovingly given me as a wedding gift. Nina ruthlessly reviewed the final drafts, not for emotional sentiment, but for strict legal clarity. She smartly struck through one angry line that could have been falsely construed as a vague threat, and she gently softened 2 others that heavily edged into aggressive accusation. What finally remained was perfectly clean, pure distilled truth. The letter simply said, "I am not writing this out of lingering anger. I am writing this out of absolute clarity. For 32 long years I patiently waited for this family to truly see me. I actively made myself smaller, quieter, and significantly more convenient, desperately hoping that one day my simple presence would be enough. It never was. You happily flew across 12 states for a pastel gender reveal, but you couldn't manage to drive 3 simple hours for my wedding day. You instantly found my husband's net worth in exactly 41 days, but you never ever found me in 32 years. I honestly wish you well, I genuinely do, but I will not be available to you anymore. Not for tense Sunday dinners, not for forced holidays, and certainly not for desperate business proposals. This firm boundary isn't a childish punishment. This is my peace. I don't need you to fully understand it. I just need you to permanently stop knocking on a heavy door I have finally closed." "I am not punishing you," I thought, pressing the wax seal onto the final envelope. "I am simply refusing to be your victim anymore." I marched to the post office and mailed all 5 identical copies via USPS certified mail. Return receipts strictly requested. Tracking numbers meticulously recorded. Official delivery confirmations instantly saved to my digital drive. Then, I officially changed my personal phone number. I completely blocked every single family account on every conceivable social platform. Nina officially became my sole emergency contact on all medical paperwork. That cool evening, Daniel held me tightly on the sprawling balcony of our Manhattan penthouse. The dark Hudson River moved steadily far below us, quiet and vast. I leaned heavily into his solid chest, closed my tired eyes, and breathed fully, deeply, pulling the clean night air into the very bottom of my lungs. I realized something profound in that moment, something I couldn't have properly explained to anyone who hadn't physically lived through the nightmare. For the very first time in 32 years, my shoulders were completely relaxed. I wasn't anxiously waiting for anyone to magically show up, and the beautiful, stretching quiet that followed wasn't a hollow emptiness. It was the deeply satisfying sound of a heavy door firmly closing on the correct side of history. 7 fast months later, the dust finally settled, and here is exactly where the falling dominoes landed. Brian's humiliating Chapter 7 bankruptcy was officially approved by the federal court in September. His prestigious New York real estate developer license was permanently revoked due to heavily documented severe financial mismanagement. The messy divorce papers rapidly followed in late October. Megan bravely filed them herself, aggressively citing the hidden affair and the massive criminally concealed debts. The tense legal asset division was incredibly brief, simply because there was absolutely nothing of value left to divide. The Kessler empire was completely dead, the legal papers were permanently filed, and the toxic family I once begged to love me was entirely broken. But just when I thought the heavy door to my past was permanently sealed, a tiny handwritten envelope arrived in the dead of winter, carrying a message that would test every single boundary I had built. Megan delivered her baby in late August. A tiny, fragile girl she bravely named Faith. Megan moved her few remaining boxes into our mother's quiet, echoing colonial in Scarsdale. Stripped entirely of her wealthy influencer sponsors and her massive staged townhouse, she took a grueling part-time job folding sweaters at a mid-tier retail store in Yonkers. It was her very first actual paycheck since her sparkly teenage pageant days. She didn't try to aggressively force contact with me. She respectfully honored the hard boundary I had drawn, but she did send a simple, quiet birthday card through Nina's office in late November. "I finally understand now," the short note read. "I hope someday in the future you'll let me try to be a real sister again. Absolutely no rush." She signed it simply with an M. The Golden Queen finally stepped down from her plastic throne. I thought, tracing her familiar handwriting with my thumb. Meanwhile, Maison Penelope painfully shuttered a third boutique by October. Only one single location remained open, bleeding money and operating at a severe daily loss. In a move that screams absolute, sheer desperation, my mother actually sold her beloved Dior wool jacket, the exact same designer jacket she wore when she ambushed my apartment, on the real for a meager $1,400 just to make her shrunken payroll. Her prestigious country club membership officially lapsed, and she couldn't afford to renew it. The wealthy, polished friends she had meticulously cultivated for 35 long years turned out to be exactly the kind of shallow companions who required a functioning platinum credit card to maintain. When the expensive champagne stopped flowing, her cheering audience completely vanished into thin air. My father lost 2 more vital consulting clients by the crisp autumn. He began rapidly downsizing his entire life. He had to let his loyal office assistant go and moved his shrinking firm into a cheap shared workspace. He sent a hesitant, handwritten letter to me through Nina. It didn't selfishly ask for a bridge loan or a financial handout. It just quietly asked to talk. I didn't write a response, but I didn't throw the sad letter away into the trash either. "You were exactly 30 years too late, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "But at least you finally learned how to use your voice." And me? I proudly signed a massive multi-year design contract with the Harrison Foundation, a complete ground-up visual rebranding of their entire national education initiative. It was the absolute largest project of my professional career, and I earned every single penny of it firmly on my creative portfolio, not on my husband's pedigree. Daniel and I bought a breathtaking, sun-drenched house out in the deep New York countryside. It was exactly 50 minutes away from Scarsdale by car, but it felt like an entirely different, peaceful universe. He still happily drove his muddy Ford F-150 on the quiet weekends. I carefully converted the bright, glass-walled sunroom into my private art studio. Right above the grand stone fireplace in our spacious living room, I finally hung a painting. It was a beautiful oil landscape of the Hudson Valley, painted by a heartbroken 15-year-old girl who had won first place and waited 18 agonizing years for anyone to actually notice her hard work. It took exactly that long to finally hang it up, not because I had carelessly forgotten about it. I hung it because I had finally, miraculously found a warm, sturdy wall that actually deserved to hold it. I built my own third row, I realized, staring at the canvas with hot tears in my eyes. And this time, every single seat is full. The second envelope arrived through Nina on a freezing Friday afternoon in December. It was handwritten on cheap, brown craft paper. There was no fancy Hallmark envelope. No embossed designer logo. It was just Megan's slightly messy handwriting, which I honestly hadn't seen since she used to slip dramatic apology notes under my bedroom door back in middle school. Seer, the letter read. I named her Faith because I desperately want to be a completely different kind of mother than the cold one we had. I do not expect your forgiveness. I just want you to know that I am finally trying. If it takes years to earn your trust, I will patiently wait. Tucked safely inside the folded card was a glossy Polaroid picture of baby Faith. She had round, soft cheeks, tufts of dark hair, and wide, innocent eyes that looked slightly startled by the bright camera flash. On the back of the photo, Megan had written one single sentence. "She has your eyes." I gently set the delicate photo down on my studio desk, right next to my glowing monitor and a half-empty mug of cold coffee. I didn't pick up the phone to call her. I didn't write a letter back. But I didn't put the picture away in a dark drawer either. Daniel saw it that evening when he softly came into the studio to tell me dinner was ready. He picked up the Polaroid, studied the baby's sweet face for a long moment, and smiled warmly. "She's absolutely beautiful, Serena," he murmured. "She really is," I replied, leaning heavily into his solid side. "And I truly hope Megan gives that little girl exactly what we never got. Someone who actually shows up." I thought deeply about that concept for a very long time after he left the room, about what it actually means to bravely leave a heavy door unlocked without fully pulling it open. I thought about the massive, crucial difference between offering blind forgiveness and granting free access. I finally realized that a healthy boundary isn't a towering, solid brick wall designed to punish people. It is simply a strong wooden gate with a sturdy lock, and I am the absolute only person who holds the heavy iron key. Megan might actually change. She was clearly already changing. The raw 3 a.m. phone call, the humble handwritten card, the quiet, painful respect for a hard line I had drawn. Or, she might not. Broken people sometimes bravely crack open, only to violently seal themselves right back up when the real work gets too hard, and you simply cannot build your own precious life around someone else's fragile potential. I didn't boldly close that door because I suddenly stopped caring about my family. I closed it because I finally, fiercely started caring about myself. I am sitting quietly on my wraparound wooden porch as I tell you this story. It is the deep New York countryside in late, crisp autumn. The towering oak trees have beautifully turned copper and spun gold. The majestic Catskill Mountains sit proudly on the far horizon, looking exactly like a vibrant watercolor painting someone left out to dry in the cool wind. There is a heavy ceramic mug of dark coffee warming my hands. It's the good kind. The rich French press Daniel meticulously makes every single evening because he says the quiet domestic ritual calms him down after a long chaotic day of being the exact person everyone in the cutthroat financial world wants 15 minutes with. He is inside our glowing kitchen right now, boiling water for pasta. He still makes the exact same lemon and caper recipe from that awful silent night in Brooklyn. The terrifying night I bravely blocked 10 phone numbers and ate dinner in absolute peace with the only remarkable person who had never ever asked me to be smaller. I scroll through my phone contacts sometimes. Nina, Daniel, Martha, a small handful of fiercely loyal college friends, the brilliant Harrison Foundation team. My glowing screen is significantly quieter than it used to be. The toxic family group chat is permanently gone. The suffocating, judgmental Sunday dinners are gone. The invisible empty chair pushed awkwardly at the very end of the long table is completely gone. I am no longer sitting in it. My mother was actually right about one specific thing. My wedding wasn't anything like Megan's. Megan's wedding was a loud, expensive performance desperately designed for strangers. Mine was a quiet, unbreakable promise. And the only people who truly needed to witness it were the ones who actually, genuinely showed up. I open my iPad and start smoothly sketching a brand new, vibrant piece for the studio. The image flows out of me easily, without any painful hesitation. A single beautiful wooden chair resting peacefully in a massive sunlit field of wild blooming flowers. It is not an empty chair, waiting sadly for someone to fill it. It is just perfectly complete all on its own. Daniel steps softly out onto the porch, carrying 2 fresh plates in his hands. He kisses the top of my head. "What are you drawing, my love?" "Something I really should have painted a very long time ago," I answer, smiling up at him. He sits down right next to me on the porch swing. The evening crickets start up their familiar rhythmic song. The vast sky above us slowly fades into a deep, bruised violet. They always say the exact opposite of love is burning hate. I honestly don't think that is true at all. I think the true opposite of love is showing up only when it is financially or socially convenient. And I think the absolute bravest thing I ever did in my entire life wasn't standing in that crowded marble gala, boldly holding my printed receipts, and speaking raw truth to a room full of powerful strangers. The bravest thing I ever did was the very next morning, when I woke up, slowly looked at my painfully quiet phone, and finally felt absolutely nothing missing. That is my entire story. And if you've sat beside me on this porch, making it to the very end of this journey, thank you. Stepping away from people who only value you when it's convenient is a quiet, intense kind of heartbreak, but it's also the birthplace of profound peace. If you felt the raw truth in these words, if the depth of this story echoed something real inside your own life, I invite you to stay connected. Hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep sharing narratives that don't shy away from the hard, beautiful realities of healing. If you are standing in the middle of your own terrifying moment of clarity, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one because your truth deserves an audience that genuinely cares. Take beautiful care of yourself, Serena.